All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here for the second My Brother's Keeper Task Force meeting. I want to take a minute just to acknowledge everyone who's back to join us this evening. We're going to have a couple of changes. We have some exciting news. First, tonight we have Mr. Malik Thompson here from the Boys and Girls Club. He goes to Eastmore Academy, so we're excited to have him as our K-12 representative today. So welcome, Malik. And secondly, we have some exciting news, sad for Columbus, but great for the city of Cincinnati. Principal Michael Owens will be moving on to lead up, is it the Arts and College, Performing Arts High School?
Creative and Performing Arts is a K-12, Cincinnati
K-12.
Public School. Yeah.
Awesome. So he'll be going back to his hometown, and we're proud to announce that Principal Jason Johnson of West High School will be joining the task force in his place. So we're honored to have both of them here tonight. So thank you. Tonight, we do have one person who is absent due to a family emergency, Mr. Sean Carter. So our thoughts and prayers are with him and his family. So I wanted to acknowledge that as well. So tonight, again, I want to thank everyone for being here. We're going to have a great panel discussion, or actually a presentation tonight and discussion. I wanted to take just a quick pause and talk a little bit about our My Brother's Keeper Youth Summits that are going on. As many of you know, the purpose of this task force is to issue a report on the state of African American male youth in Columbus and also some recommendations about how the city can better support their development. As part of that, we wanted to make sure that we actually went to the youth and heard their voices to incorporate that information into the formation of our recommendations. In doing that, we have put together 4 youth summits on the different sides of town, which actually are on the same nights as 4 of our CAP City nights, which Mr. Corey Leftridge on our task force heads up as a part of the APS program. So far we've had 2. The first one was in the Linden community. The second one was at West High School. Our next one is on Friday, July 10th at South High School. And then the last one is on July 25th at Walnut Ridge High School. We are encouraging everyone to bring youth out. We're targeting African American males ages 10 to 18. We know that it's not the most provocative thing for them to come back to school on a Saturday or a Friday in the hot summertime, so we really need adults to bring them there and also register them at www.columbus.gov/MBK 2015. So again, we really look forward to having you make sure that youth turn out. When the youth come, they're very engaged. We've been gathering a lot of great information, and we'll look forward to sharing that with you when we gather again in the fall. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Councilmember Hardin. Thank you.
Thank you, Keisha, and thank you all for being here. This is the second meeting that we're coming back together as the MBK Task Force. This time, we first started looking over and exploring opportunities and issues around workforce development. Today, thanks to and with the leadership of Dr. Deanna Wilkinson, we'll explore community safety opportunities and issues. I think it's really important for us to acknowledge the importance of what we're doing. These conversations are not just conversations without an end. We are working towards this fall when we will have a report that then we can take direct action on. For this community in particular, folks have made promises and not followed up. This cannot be that. We have to be ready to take action on what we come up with. And really, taking part today the United Way released their report today on young men of color, and I got to attend the CMC luncheon. And what I really believe is that this city is poised to do something. It's young men of color. The issues and opportunities surrounding them are on the tips of everyone's tongue. I really believe it's on their minds and their hearts. And so what we want to do is provide the leadership and the push to actually get something done. So you being here is extremely important. What we're going to continue to ask as we go along is that each one of you represents, or asked to be on this task force because of the constituency and how you touch this population. We will work with you over the next months as we continue the youth summits to really work with your peer groups, to expand the conversation, expand the tent. We can't do this just with the folks that are in this room. So we need to reach out, touch folks, and get folks behind the mission to improve the state of young boys of color here in Columbus. So I appreciate you for being here. I appreciate the commitment that you've made. With that, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Moore so we can get started. Again, these are informal conversations. If you have a question, speak up. If you have a comment, speak up. At the end, we'll open it up for folks in the community if they have any questions or comments. But let's get started. Thank you.
Greetings. It's my pleasure to be able to introduce today's speaker, a dear colleague and friend, Dr. Deanna Wilkerson. She is an associate professor in the Department of Human Sciences at The Ohio State University. Her research focuses on adolescent development, risk and problem behaviors, youth violence, firearm use prevention, and community partnerships. She has published extensively in a wide array of top-tier journals and books, and she is a major asset at The Ohio State University, as well as the larger community in Columbus. Please join me in welcoming her to the podium.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. It's always a pleasure to see you, and I don't get to do it often enough, so I'm going to lead you through a long career focusing on how do we make our communities safe for all children, but especially for young black men. And I've been on this journey for almost 30 years of either pursuing education to understand these complex problems or working directly on research or community action to get a handle on this complex issue. And we know a lot, but we have a lot more to learn, and hopefully I can spark some thoughts in you that you can take with you for formulating your challenges. So what are some of the things that we know, patterns about the youth gun violence problem? And I've primarily focused my attention on the peak years for gun death and injury. 16 to 24-year-old African American and Latino men are the folks that I've studied in cities all around the country, not just here in Columbus. But we know that gun violence is the leading cause of death, and it has been for as long as we've been collecting disaggregated race data in the United States. So it's a pathetic problem that we haven't even moved the needle on, which aggravates me. So I have a lot of passion about this issue. I think about this issue 24 hours a day, even when I should be doing other things. But it's a time for action, and I think we have some steps that we can take, and hopefully we can talk about those. But we know a lot. We know that gun violence concentrates in geographic areas. We know it's highly correlated with poverty. We know it concentrates within social networks. We know all these things. What do we know about the risk factors? Who's at risk? We are talking about one sliver of the African American youth male experience. Let's say 5 to 8% of young black men in urban communities are those at the highest risk. The rest are exposed to these risk factors. What we don't know as well is what works to intervene and how to affect that 5 to 8% who are already deeply engaged, who have already suffered traumas and perpetrated traumas on other folks. We also know it's very hard to predict future behavior. So we can find out all kinds of information about what someone has been through and try to come up with a set of factors to guess which kids are going to go down the path. And we just really don't do that very well. The science doesn't help us as much as we'd like it to. But there's a lot that we don't pay attention to in what we see, and I'm going to talk about some of those kinds of things. So who's at the greatest risk, and what are those risk factors, and what can we do to minimize those risks? That's really what this conversation is about, because it's not the same for everyone, and unfortunately, or fortunately, I actually think it's unfortunately, most of us think we know what it is to be a young black male growing up in the United States. People have an image, and most of those images get us off track and create problems for healthy development for these young people, and that's part of the risk factor, the conversation that we don't usually have. But in terms of the trends, we know gun violence disproportionately affects African Americans, and the rates have ebbed and flowed over time, although we are currently in probably an uptick, but it's nowhere near where it was in the peak in the 1990s. It's still way too much. And in some communities and some areas where we're working here in Columbus and other places in every city in the United States, there's pockets that are just so huge that we have to do something. So again, stats on the leading causes of death, not something that you don't already know, but just a reminder. And when I see these stats, they're not just stats to me, because I have been working out in the community for long enough that some young people that I've worked with have been killed. And some of the children that I worked with today, in fact, their dads have been murdered and their moms have been murdered. And so it's really personal to me. And it's really personal in terms of we have to get all of us adults together to do something now. This is urgent, we can't wait. And if you're not convinced by the time I'm done, just let me have one-on-ones with you, because I want some action. So, the stats, the breakdowns on this, we have all like the big picture, but how do we get into it? And we know different parts of Columbus are disproportionately chronically experiencing gun violence, and we know that the things that go with that, poverty, inequality, low educational attainment, low educational success rates in the schools failing in these same areas. So, we could add lead paint, we can make heat maps of all the risk factors, and they all converge the same way.
What is that red?
That red is the Linden community. There's there's a hot spot right on the south side, a little bit kind of close to Children's Hospital, a little bit east of that. Then there's Linden, and then there's North Linden. Then the west side is the other one on this side.
Yeah.
Oh, the bullseye, that is, so I read the report from the United Way, and they were focusing on 43207. That's 43207. So I wanted to just say, okay, take the crime data that Columbus Police makes available to any citizen, put up a heat map. What does it look like? This is the black dots are homicides this year, and the heat is generated from, in this particular run, homicides, ag assaults, and robberies to individuals. I left out the commercial robberies because it looks different, and it was interpersonal violence was what I was getting at. And I love this tool. I know it's not perfect, and I know it's not going to hold up to peer review and all that kind of stuff, but it is so nice to be able to just get a visual. And there's a lot more you can do with it.
So just really quick, could you go back to that map? So does
Yep.
that mean that bullseye that you have there? So
That's a cold zone, actually. So
you would interpret that then as being maybe not. Oh wait, so the bullseye.
I did the geographic honing in on 43207 because I
Right.
wanted to see.
But then it's a cold zone.
It
you
is.
said when it comes.
Yeah, when you take that away, underneath there is the blue layer. The blue layer is basically fairly low rates of violence in that area. And if you plot simple assaults, the picture looks different because that's a lot of the domestics and stuff like that. So, maps can do a lot, but there's bazillions of different ways to interpret them. And what I do for my work on the south side is actually hone in on a 60-block area and monitor everything that happens in that area to try to be able to do stuff to intervene. And without the data, we're just, working in the dark. And so you got to have a data-driven solution. So what is it about communities that allows that map to be the pattern? I mentioned things that are correlated with gun violence. I mentioned different aspects of risk factors. But what about community social norms? And what have we learned from 200 years of sociology and urban studies about the patterns of community life that may contribute or allow risk factors to overwhelm protective factors in a community? And there's really a lot of things that are both historical and just about how our lifestyles have changed, of how in communities where things are starting to run down, there are vacant buildings, all these things sort of create a perfect storm, so where you see those hot spots. But we also have residential segregation, we have patterns of policy that have created those maps. The policies of the past have created those zones where poverty, all of that kind of stuff. So what do we do about that? How do we rebuild community if that's what it is that we're trying to do? And a lot of it is trying to understand what are community norms, how do you get people reinvested to do something different than going inside their house and protecting themselves and withdrawing from community life. Community norms and a quote-unquote healthy community happens when people are actively engaged. And so, we have a lot of different programs, we have all these different things going on. Columbus is a resource-rich community. And compared to so many other cities that I've worked in, the poverty here does not look like the poverty in, South Philly or the south side of Chicago or the west side of Chicago or Oakland, California, or, there's so many different assets that we have here that the map should not have big, bright red spots. But the same things take hold here. Fear causes people to withdraw. We're all busy. People who have more advantage move out of neighborhoods that are declining. Why? Because they want better for their kids. They want better for themselves. They want to be safe. And so all of these things are part of what we need to be thinking about, particularly as, in focusing on what we can do to improve outcomes for young black men, make their communities safer, number one. Number two, acknowledge that poverty and all of the things that go along with poverty create adaptive, maladaptive ways that people survive. And when you're in survival mode, it's hard to think about, your long-term goals of trying to get to college or, all the things that maybe people from a middle-class background would take for granted. And so understanding, poverty and the implications of that and the link between poverty and violence. But I better start talking faster anyway. What we know about communities with high crime and high violence rates is that there's low levels of participation in what we call informal social control. So and some of this is according to the theory, but it's also borne out in observational studies where, if adults in the community do not correct the behavior of kids in a playground setting or in a school setting or in, on the steps of their house, all of those things basically mean that the kids are going to figure out what to do themselves, and there's going to be this breakdown. Kids need to have someone monitoring them. They need to have, some boundaries around what's okay and what's not okay. And the ways that we do that is have people available to care. And it's not always going to be the mom and dad, and we can, the breakdown of the family, we can blame the family all day long. But community members can take the place of family members to help protect and create this environment for kids to grow up. We also know in high crime communities there's high levels of fear and also high levels of victimization. People have experienced a lot of trauma in those neighborhoods, and it's no wonder they don't trust others. And we also know that, for example, in the men that I studied in New York City, they had experienced 99% of them had witnessed someone being murdered. Now, that's more than the soldiers in the first Iraq War. I don't know if it's more than the next Iraq War, but it's a huge amount. And 0% of them had counseling, 0. And so I'm not saying that everyone needs counseling and that's the answer, but there's no place to process this stuff. It's just something that, we use our old school ways, suck it up, move on, all that kind of stuff. And what does that do? Internalize it, and we have kids acting out, and we're wondering why their trauma's not processed, and it needs to be processed. We also know that in high crime areas, there's high levels of isolation. So some people have resources, other people don't have resources. There's not a lot of moving back and forth, and people can go for long periods of time without interacting at all. And that isolation, it really creates more problems. We also know in high violence neighborhoods that there are dense networks of offenders living in those neighborhoods, and those neighborhoods are specifically attractive to set up, a drug operation or some other illegal enterprise because everyone's withdrawn. No one's going to be calling the police, and no one's trusting anyone. So that breaks down all of those things. So I hope you can see this. I think you can see it pretty well. This schematic comes from me synthesizing 400 interviews from 416 young men about all the risk factors and what they experience. And I'm a walking encyclopedia of knowing about their lives, but also knowing what's been tried in every place around the country and why it works and what part of this overall complex picture it's trying to implement, or it's trying to impact. But let me walk you through this risk domain schema that I came up with, because it's I could spend the whole time talking about this slide, and maybe I will, but it's very important for us to understand that this is a multi-layered problem that has aspects that each one of us in the roles that we're in, and people who aren't in this room who have important roles, have something to do to intervene in this problem and to put in place things so we need to intervene for those who are already at risk. We need to prevent this from becoming the reality for those who are not yet at risk or have risk onset, whatever it's like who's at risk and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, words just get in the way, I'm sorry. So I'm gonna start with the outer ring. Concentrated poverty and hot spots this is a geographic, it's spatially patterned behavior. Those risks are spatially, so we know we can probably all, just off the top of our head, name, the 5 top neighborhoods in Columbus that we're most concerned about young black men dying from gun violence. Could we do that? You guys all have 5 in your mind? Okay. And even within those 5, there's probably, Deputy Chief Bash would know, probably the 6 blocks within every 5 areas where you're most concerned. It's very specific, and because of that, That's one of the things that gets me most frustrated. Why don't we use that same information to then solve the problem? Because this pattern keeps repeating itself. It's actually repeating 3 generations, maybe 4. And so, why aren't we smarter than that? Aren't we better than that? I don't know. And so, it's just like, okay. So that's the outer layer in this schema. The next one is there's a high level of legal cynicism. There's a huge distrust of our legal system, our police system, the courts, the welfare system, the school system, and I put in here, the distrust comes from perceptions as well as concrete experiences that people have had of feeling mistreated or hearing about others being mistreated or just not feeling like they're full citizens. So even if they have the same experience as someone else, that they're not going to be treated fairly. And that legal cynicism creates a space where young people in particular believe that it is okay for them to take the law in their own hands and for them to handle their own conflicts, because many of the things that they're taught growing up as young men is, you got to handle your business, you got to confront things directly, right, straight on, and you're not going to tell on somebody for violating your rights. Well, if there's a breakdown in your belief in that the police can actually help you or the courts are going to help you or be responsive to your behavior, you don't want to just be helpless and do nothing. It makes perfect sense that they would choose to use violence as a means to aggrieve grievances because it is available to them as a resource. And, I have spent so much time with young people thinking about this and seeing it in action that trying to reverse that thinking is very complex, and trying to reverse it such that they need to have the experiences of law enforcement being involved in, and they do have these experiences. They have positive experiences with law enforcement in this city and in many other cities. I'm not saying it's all negative, and it wouldn't even matter if you brought in another police force. It'd be the same dynamic that would recreate itself because of the space that they're in and the space of an expectation that they're going to be criminal, that they're going to do illegal things, particularly if they live in those neighborhoods. And so many kids and so many families, do everything they can do to try to protect their kids from having any involvement with the system. And I would say that is the best advice to give any Black mom and dad in the city is, no matter what, use all your resources to protect your kid from getting put in the system, because that's the number one risk factor to a whole lifetime of more negative outcomes coming forward. So we got the legal cynicism going, and really the systems of control, and also in some ways the systems of opportunity also create that same space for them. Then the next layer is all about identity development and the normative codes that take the place of having a belief that your environment is safe and that adults and authorities are going to protect you and that your life is valued. All of those things help to create identities where being the toughest guy on the street, being in my study, what the guys called it was being a crazy killer, that had the most status among young men. And the reason why it had the most status is because you could intimidate other people and make them feel afraid. And that sense of helplessness that you feel as a victim and that process, there's a shift that happens. So many of the young men in my study reported a age-graded process where they learned from probably about age 7 to 11 that other people were going to beat them down, and used violence against them until they fought back, until they learned how to hold their own. And then getting past that, they needed to develop an identity that allowed them not to be messed with by other people. And sometimes that came through, some talent or ability that they had that would protect them from the street, world. And sometimes it came through violence and being effective, maybe, before guns proliferated our communities, people handled things in different ways. And, for the last 25 years, we've had more guns than at any other point in time. And we've also had more gun violence, even though, the rates are not nearly where they were. So you have this sense of self, who am I? I don't want to be weak. I don't want to be a victim. And, that means I need to do certain things to not have that lower status. And the other next layer is group norms and affiliations and those networks. So you're in a neighborhood that's not safe. You got to connect with other young people who are going to be there and have your back. And even if you're not, a kid who wants to get involved in violence, or someone who just holds their own, if someone comes to you, you're going to take care of business, but you're not going to actively go pursue someone. You still need other people, particularly when the assumption and probably the reality is whoever you're having a probably normal adolescent conflict with may be armed. And so something that may be very minor and not serious could escalate to life and death. So of course you want to align yourself with enough other people who are going to help you out, know what's going on, and also the group fills a lot of voids of, absent fathers, absent mothers, dysfunctional families. And so understanding that is really, really key and important. And those networks create a lot of liabilities that, when we think about retaliatory violence, things spiraling out of control from one situation to another, which are actually things that we can prevent. If we can understand the networks, how kids are connected to each other, and who's having a conflict with whom, whatever, my English is not so good. We can use that same information to interrupt violence and also to understand that group risk and take it apart. Little brothers who've lost an older sibling, they're at huge risk. We should be wrapping those kids with resources and doing everything we can do to make sure that the 13-year-old whose brother was murdered when he was age 16 isn't just getting ready to become 16, because I know at least 3 kids who that's their thinking, and they're now in that window, and we have our arms wrapped around them. We're trying to keep them safe, but it's scary. We need to do more. So on to cognitive and socio-emotional. So these kids are carrying around a lot of anger. They're carrying around a lot of trauma. They're carrying around a lot of grief. And the anger comes from every place. It comes from the fact that they live in a society that's racist. It comes from the fact that no matter what anyone tells them about how hard they work, they experience something different. It comes from them experiencing people having low expectations of them, or being in, a school where they're getting a decent GPA, but they can't pass the OGT, or they can't read at a level that they know they're going to need to get on. So we need to have higher expectations, and we need it as a life and death kind of way of thinking. And I believe that the lower expectations and the expectation that certain kids are going to become involved in the criminal justice system, or they're going to die, like, kids start internalizing this and believing this. But I think us adults do too. Not that we think they're all going to die, but it's happened so many times that we have become desensitized. We aren't mobilizing the way we did in the past. We're not even sure if that helps. And but it sends a message that their lives don't matter. And not in the same way of Black lives don't matter, but in the way well, I guess it does, it's all the same, but getting back to honoring their experience, that they have real reasons to have anger and process the trauma that they've experienced. I mean, I'm working with 80 kids right now, and knowing the history of what their parents have been through, what some of these kids have been through, it's just hard for me to even sleep at night sometimes worrying about these kids. And they're doing pretty good right now. But what good does it do to worry? I can't take them out of the environment. I can't protect them from all the things that they have to experience. But who will? Who is? Why as a society, don't we do that? And so, yeah, I've gotten so deep that sometimes it hurts me, but I'm healthy enough to know that as long as I take care of myself, I can still do this work and be effective. But I have to watch it too, because I have a lot of trauma in my background, and I've processed my trauma. I've had so much counseling and that kind of thing. But I want someone to worry about these kids like this, because they deserve it. They deserve to have someone care enough to be making sure that they're getting what they need at every level, and in the schools and in the community, and repeatedly. And so the last thing up here is the main centerpiece of what happens in these situations, which is what I've spent a lot of my career dissecting. What happens in violent events? How do young men make a decision to shoot another person? How do these things unravel? And what does it look like? And what can we do to undo it so it doesn't happen? And I'm going to talk with you a little bit about that, because we actually have learned a lot, and we can, again, use this information to diffuse situations, read what's going on, be really looking out for these signs and these risk factors way before we get 2 people or 3 people or 10 people facing off with firearms shooting at each other in the street.
Dr. Wilkerson, before
Yep.
you move on to that slide, I would just be interested to see if, you gave us a lot of information throughout those different layers. See if anyone had comments or questions just about those. I was going back to spatial and geographical, because you kind of put it out there as an obvious that we know exactly where this is happening. When you down to the street, but why can't we apparently focus our efforts that specifically? And is it because there's all those layers in between where it's happening and what we do in that area? Because it is as simple as we know where it's happening. But
Right.
when it's stopping,
Well, I think we have to have more than one tool. And, right now, the best tool we have is law enforcement. And they work very hard. And, I think I have trauma knowing these kids. Imagine what these guys do. I don't know how, we should all start a support group. I don't know, but there should be crisis intervention teams. There should be more resources to look at hotspots in a way, and so it's very tailored resources that require partnerships and people trusting across silos that, are deep and long in this city and almost every other city that I know of. And also that it's people at the grassroots level in those communities that can be most effective. So, I can stand up here and talk about this forever, and I know that some of my credibility in being an expert in this area comes from my academic credentials, but most of it actually comes from my experience in the streets and working with people. But I'm still a white woman doing this work, and I can't do it alone. I don't understand. Most of the things I know I've learned from people in the Black community, and watching them and listening and crying together and, just dealing with what we deal with. But the police can't do it alone. They're asked to do so many things, and the things that they know, it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't go to, public health workers who can then intervene, and maybe it does some of the time. I'm not saying that we never get this right, but there are whole ways of intervening that just require these partnerships, that require a new way of thinking about this. And, they require partnerships where, there's a shooting in an area, the schools need to know about this, and they need to know about how to care for these young people who've just lost, their 16-year-old friend. And, oh, you're supposed to have an OGT test today. Well, too bad, you have to take the test. They're not gonna pass, and it's all interrelated, and it's really those relationships that need to happen where we admit we don't have all the answers, but maybe together we can move a little closer to helping young people feel supported so that these norms don't keep on getting passed down to the next generation or tweaked in a different way and those kinds of things. So, I don't know if that's helpful, but, I could think on this and talk on it forever because, again, it keeps me up at night.
Dr. Wilkerson, my question involves, in looking at this chart, are we to interpret it as a ranking of sort, or is it just what it is, the domains, with regards to just how you laid it out?
I think about it sort of as like the layers of an onion, and you peel these things back, and the events. It's moving out from an event, so people engaged in a social interaction that potentially turns violent or can turn violent. Moving out from that, those people have social emotional needs, and their group processes affecting. So this is kind of a schematic from thinking about intervening individual, intervening group, intervening networks of groups, intervening community level, intervening society level. Yeah.
You talk about norms and how policy has led to a lot of the conditions. How are you defining norms? What do you think is a normal environment for African American and healthy neighborhood environment, and what is that predicated?
So norms don't equal normal, and actually there is no normal. I tried to be normal once, but I know it's. But norms are what's okay. What do people believe is okay in the community? What do they tolerate? What do they want to see happen? What are their goals and expectations? And it's not imposing some ideas on other people. It's finding out genuinely what people's beliefs are there. And in many communities where people are moving in and out and there's not a longevity of being neighbors together, there's probably norm confusion. People don't know what other people believe. And so if there's no gatherings to come together to get a sense of, who are we and what do we believe, then there's a lot less trust and those kinds of things. So I don't define norms for anybody. I think really spending the time and really getting to know people, it's so complex that there's so many things on board, but I think you could hardly find a group of people that think it's okay for someone to shoot and kill someone, and in terms of a norm. There may be a small group of people, but hopefully they're serving life in prison. I'm not sure.
So where, I've been thinking, it came up today a lot about the criminal justice system and how it is totally unfair in this country. And, one statistic that we heard this afternoon at the Metropolitan Club is the high school graduation rate for African American males in this community is 54%. At the same time, 1 out of every 3 African American men who has dropped out of high school in this state is currently incarcerated. And, you also think about, just kind of on the topic of norms, what's right and what's wrong, and this isn't to do with gun violence, but I think there's so often a 16-year-old can end up in the criminal justice system with a felony, moving forward, no opportunities to be employed, and quite frankly, for doing something that happens in wealthier neighborhoods all the time and probably more frequently. Yet, like, we've removed generations of men really from communities or from having any sort of opportunity to participate in a meaningful way. And so I guess where does that fit in, and how is that part of, because I am all about, neighborhood interventions. I mean, that's what we do at Boys and Girls Clubs, but I also think, are those interventions ever going to work in a generational sense if we're still locking up everyone's fathers or locking up, I mean, how does that play into it, and what does it take to make a change there? Is that a state, specific, is that a state level policy change that needs to happen? Is it county? Is it, where are some of those?
Well, and that's
places
why
that
I
we can
focus
start
my
to
attention on
influence?
prevention and intervention, because violence is an interpersonal interaction, and so much of what we know about how to stop violence is to find out what's making people upset, having someone who can get in between them, and so much of the youth violence, and I'll show you some tables in a bit. If there had been anybody there who was willing to just pull people apart and people pull people apart even when they're both armed and successfully mediate these conflicts, stopping the violence stops the whole wave of the criminal justice system. The police are, for the most part, arresting people for committing crimes. That's their job. That's what we've asked them to do as a society. That is a norm issue that, we want to enforce our laws, and we need to have laws. We need to have a social order in our society. The penalties that come down and the harshness of the penalties and the collateral consequences and all of that kind of stuff, those are policy questions. Those are things that, why don't we give people second chances? Why can't, it's just something someone does when they're 16, follow them for the rest of their life when, their brain's not even fully matured until they're in their 20s. And, so I agree with those thoughts, but I also know that redirecting behavior, getting kids who are starting to, hang out and act in different ways before they get too far, because most of the time they're getting sucked into this vortex at a point in time where they are not developmentally able to make the kinds of decisions that we look at them from our adult brain and our adult experience and put judgment on them. They're not there. And then, you add to that, maybe they were fetal alcohol syndrome children, maybe they were drug addicted, maybe they have disabilities, because those are all also risk factors for being in the criminal justice system. And so it's a really complex issue. And my next slide helps us with this slightly. We need to differentiate risk. We need to know the differences between who we're dealing with, what their issues are, and how to help them. There's different levels of risk among individuals. People aren't risky all the time. Kids aren't. Even kids who are armed to the teeth, they're not going around shooting people every single day. There's certain times when violence snaps off. Why? We can get inside that. There's different levels of risk among groups. And again, with that, groups over time. Beefs change, people move, people get incarcerated, people are coming back to the community. All of those things impact what might happen or what might not happen. Levels of risk vary across geographic space, time of day. I bring my sons out to the neighborhood on the south side and I've convinced them, I even show them data, but they don't really want to see data, but that it's safe to be there. Sometimes, I have to face the reality. My kids worry about me when I'm out doing my work in the community. But I show them, I am not there past 10 o'clock at night. Nothing happens during the day. It's safe. If I was out hanging out in the middle of the night, I couldn't say that to them. But, yeah.
Well, I feel like this is like part of our problem here with your kids worrying about you being out there in the first place.
Yep.
This is like where most of these problems I feel stimulate from is people already judge us just because
Yep.
we live in our neighborhood.
Yep.
I live in a South Side neighborhood, but
Yep.
do I shoot people? No. Do I think about shooting people? No.
Yep.
I try to get success for me.
Yep.
So when you and your kids say, they worry about you being out there, it's just a simple thing that can lead to somebody feeling mistrust because
Yeah.
we already have the eyes on us to do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
It's where we start off as, just because we were born into being black. No one ever chooses it, but that's where we are. So it's just, this is what I'm feeling like where most of these problems stimulate from, because we have the camera, we have it on us.
Yep.
So when you're saying like putting police in these areas too, I feel like that won't really change anything because let's say that this camera is the police basically. Now it's on me. So I could either sit here and talk how I am now, or I can act a fool on the camera to show everybody else, hey, I'm on camera. So I feel like that's part of the reason why most of these people are getting arrested too, because they're here. Well, the police are here, so let's show out, because we can show our friends that we're cool, and we do this, and we do that. Not just, I feel like putting police in these areas isn't going to do them any good. Now, stopping the police from going to these areas, no, but distributing more isn't going to do anything else besides make people want to do more stuff, because now they know that the spotlight's on them.
So we need some other kind of resource to be going to the kids, right?
And I feel like,
And thank you for saying that. I'm really happy.
but I feel
that
like
you
you
said
have to
that.
get to them as kids, because
Yep.
if you're at where I'm at now, there's no way, me going to the Boys and Girls Club or the library is going to stop me from acting the way I am now. But if you could stop them, like, when I was younger, I went to a Boys and Girls Club, and I feel like we need, more of those, more Boys and Girls Clubs, instead of more libraries, because libraries are good resources, but they're not where a kid would go. We need to stop them as a kid. So, I feel like even though you could put a kid in this whole program and, they could still come out bad, but that's not you. You've tried. So,
Well, and we all should applaud. That's awesome. I really think that we, at least for some time, need to focus on the adults in the community. We need to focus on getting adults re-engaged in being active members in the lives of children in their community, other people's children, all children. And the way we do that is by giving of our time, being volunteers in the community, and getting to know these young people, and, being able to care enough where, I know the names of probably 60 of the 80 kids because I'm not good at, knowing those names. Yeah, Corey?
Yeah, Dr. Wilkerson, I wanted to talk about the very first chart you had up there, and it really read like a timeline of my childhood, because I think the violence peaked or spiked initially in the mid-'80s on that first chart, and then started to come down later. But if you looked at that window, that's my life from probably about 15 until I'm 30.
Right.
And I can remember my neighborhood changed. I grew up in the inner city of Cleveland, in Glenville area. It was a middle-class black neighborhood at once upon a time. The men worked, families were together, then crack cocaine hit. Things changed. Immediately, violence spiked. My friends, I'm the one male in my street that I grew up on that graduated from high school out of a group of maybe 10 peers that graduated from high school. 2 of my friends committed murders by the time we were 17. All around drugs. They didn't come from these homes that were broken yet. They became broken. My home became broken because of drugs later. But in the midst of this, we had some different norms. We had different community values that were operating. But the community went through a period of aggressive elements that destabilized it, to put it nicely. But I saw a change in the attitudes of my friends. They were taking risks that we normally wouldn't take. We would do things that were fun, but then gunplay got into the middle of it. and it changed the nature of our conflicts. My friend committed a murder because not because he was trying to, put it this way. He was at a bar and he saw a guy that used to intimidate him when he was younger. Now they both big and bad, and so they're trying to get at the same girl. It was an ego thing. He had a lot of fear in him of that man from his childhood. Now everybody got guns. It became a simple argument over who was getting a number that became a trauma, a murder. Back in the day, that would have been just a fight, a fist fight. The proliferation of guns and the proliferation of drugs made every conflict fatal, potentially fatal. Not every conflict is fatal, but potentially fatal. And that changed the nature of our communities and changed the scope of how we dealt with one another. But as we move forward, you see a downturn, a downclick in a lot of these things. It kind of leveled off. I'm not saying it went away, but it leveled off. It's still at a higher level than it used to be pre-83, right? And now we're at a point in today's society, and I'm gonna just skip forward. We have a moment that we can take advantage of right now. The climate in America is very volatile, but it's more engaged than it was since the 60s and 70s. I mean, if we look at what's going on across the country right now and just the reaction to some of these traumas that we're seeing, I think society is ready to do something different. Now, we all have to look at ourselves and see, okay, what part can I play and how can I play it to my best? Not get outside of myself and do something I couldn't do, but how can I play my part my best? One of the things I know that we have to focus on, and if you get to the epicenter of your chart, we got to rebuild the families. We got to restore the roles of fathers and men and mothers and aunts and uncles, the extended family, not just the nuclear family. We got to build these communities back.
All right, well, next time you can come up and speak. Let me keep going here, okay? Thank you. I agree with you. There's just, there are particular things that we can do that break this down situationally, that help us to be able to line up the resources that we already have that are already in some ways allocated to this. And the more structural, deeper generational stuff, we need to be doing that too. But in the meantime, we can be doing things to stop the next homicide, to stop the next ag assault, and also to make sure effective services get in for people who have been victimized, their family members, the children of these. You know, I mean, I have a little 6-year-old in the summer program. Her dad was murdered last September, and I can tell just from every interaction she has, she's fallen apart on the inside. She doesn't talk about it, you know, and any of this kind of stuff, but we're trying to give her resources. But there, you know, these traumas, and you know, we could go back 15 years ago and probably look in that same family, and there was, you know, someone in that generation, and so this is part of the work that we're doing. So, you know, again, I'm going to just try to get through these really quick. High levels of exposure into the community, and you know, just because your family member wasn't the one that was murdered, if you live in a community, you're deeply impacted, particularly, you know, the tight community. I mean, the beautiful thing that I've discovered in being an ally in the community is just how beautiful the Black community is. The relationships, the love, and the going out of their way to help each other. I mean, I'm jealous. I want that. And I came from a big family, and so I kind of miss the family aspect, but the Black community is a beautiful community, and the one that I work in has suffered a lot of violence. But what I see is people who are so resilient and so caring and trying their best every day to do something to make it a little bit better. And there's no easy answer. This isn't like, you know, we can add 3 + 3 + 3 and get to the answer. It's not going to be that simple. And so knowing all these things and knowing, what this young man shared of just the perception of place and what that does to our young people as well, the perception of schools, the school report cards comes out and, oh, you're in a failing school. Do you know how many kids in my summer camp said, my school got an F, what am I supposed to do? They don't teach me anything, I don't learn anything, and so I'm like, well, what are you interested in? What do you want to learn? Get them back to being curious and interested in stuff because they're really smart and they need to be stimulated. So the spatial patterns, there's a really neat study that was done by one of my colleagues, Andy Papacristo and his friend, where they looked at the social networks of violent offenders and were able to, and using data from Chicago, map the networks of these people who are system involved. And when they ratchet it down, basically, if you were part of one of the most violent networks in the city of Chicago, you were more than 3,000 times more likely to be a homicide victim within a 5-year period of time. And that if you became more distant from that network, so if you were 5 handshakes away from the epicenter of that network, your risk of dying of homicide went way down. And so Andy's work and many other work being done down at Cincinnati, using this network data to help us to understand where to intervene, how to intervene, and so many of the young people are on the fringe. They get sucked in because, if something happens, and when I talk about the liability of that network, if something happens and your boy helped you out in the past, the expectation is that you have to do, the most lethal thing in that situation. But what we know is that so often there's not the intent to do that. There's the pressure, the social pressure to make that happen. And so again, we can understand these networks and the risk. So this picture is a couple of different pictures of people in the community on the south side who have died. And actually the picture on the right is a group of women plus Brother Cecil and plus, I'm a woman, but people who have lost at least one family member to gun violence in this community and their babies. And that picture was taken after Sabrina Jackson was murdered, I believe. And that was this year. And yesterday I was working with her 18-year-old son, and it's like, this is real. These are real people with real complicated lives, real wonderful people, and we need to focus on those highest risks to make sure all those family members, all the people connected to murder victims, they're at risk. They're at high risk, particularly the boys. The girls are much less likely to go on to perpetrate violence, but they're also very likely to be in domestic violence situations. And so, again, we have to focus. So, I mentioned that I did this big study in New York back in the 90s during the peak of the gun violence epidemic. I've written 2 books on this topic, and, if you want to cry and read lots of cuss words, you can read my book. But I had grown men serving life in prison in Graterford, Pennsylvania, read my book and went in to do a book discussion, and all those men talked about how this was the first time they found themselves in a book. It told their story. So, people serving life in prison, this was the way they came up, so you can read about it. Not sure how well you're going to see that. But, so if I was going to make a giant puzzle, these are the 4 main components of the puzzle that we need to tackle. Exposure to violence, that status hierarchy, how are young people earning their sense of being, sense of identity, and if violence is any part of that, how can we redirect that into something more positive? The environment is dangerous, and what does that mean? distrust of systems, the legal system, and all other systems. Scripts for violence. So another thing about norms is what you see on a routine basis, what you're exposed to, that becomes part of what you think is normal. So when I was growing up, we went to my grandmother's house every Sunday. Every Sunday, there was a half barrel on tap, and all of my relatives got drunk. I grew up thinking that was normal. Was that normal? It was normal for my family. I had to go, hang out with other people who weren't normal, like my family, to find out that was weird. People don't do that. Probably not so good. So the scripts that they have about how you have to react in these situations, what scripted behavior is, if you think about where, how do we know what to do when we go into a restaurant? We have in our brain a menu of what to do. If we walk through a McDonald's, we know how to order McDonald's. We go to a 5-star restaurant, I don't know what to do. We fall back on what we know. That's the same thing that happens in conflict situations. Fast cognition. And the scripts, you go to the closest thing. So you can think about video games are helping to form scripts. Movies are helping to form scripts. The imaging in the media about black males being homicide suspects and all those things are forming scripts. Scripts really are important. And then this isolation, the feeling that you shared, I would tap that at least partly as isolation. Like you don't feel like you're valued just simply because you're black skin. And that is a form of isolation, racial isolation, that creates all kinds of other problems. And there's lots of other ways that isolation wears itself out. Like, if you have a felony record, there's a whole nother way that you're cut off from society. Okay, so what can we be doing? I'm gonna try to skip through, but I wanna share a few things. I have no idea how bad I'm doing on time, but I see you moving in your chair, so I must be going. It's too slow, okay.
We can get you some solutions.
Yeah. So we asked a lot of questions about what's going on in the community, partly because we wanted to learn from the young people about what we could be doing. And they confirmed this whole idea that adults aren't really doing much. And that may or may not be true in the city of Columbus. But we asked them, what are community leaders doing? Do you feel they're doing their part to reduce violence in your neighborhood? So think about if we asked young people these questions, and this might be something we do in the forums or something like that, what would they say in terms of community leaders, religious leaders, the criminal justice system, the police? We pretty much routinely got more no's than anything else. No, they're not doing their part, and lots of comments in between, and skepticism in general about what other people are doing to resolve this problem. And then we also asked the same question of what do you think young people are doing? No, we're screwing up too. So they were equally critical. Then we asked them about what about adult-youth relations in your neighborhood? And now again, think about this is young men that are deeply engaged in violence. Adults fear teenagers, they avoid, ignore them, they show care and try to help, 21%. Adults have no relationship with teenagers. Adults give teens respect. Adults are involved in the same bad behavior as teens. Adults give respect if they get respect. Adults don't care about or hate teenagers. Adults have no respect for teenagers. Adults have good relationships. A couple kids said that. Adults have hi and goodbye relationships. So overwhelmingly, 61% of respondents had a negative connotation to their comments, and 26% had a positive, and 12 or so were both positive and negative. So when you think about that, we know, and it's always been true, that there's this divide between teens and preteens, adults, where we don't do such a good job interacting because teens are going through what they're going through, and it's this awkward space. I'm not still a child, I'm not yet an adult, you want me to have more responsibility, I want to have autonomy, all these things that are going on. We don't do a very good job, but we need to do a better job if we want to keep them safe and to encourage them to become productive parts of our community. We can only do that by giving them a voice, giving them a way to help make decisions that shape what policies that we have about their lives. And so it's really important in that issue. So I'm actually just going to skip all of this stuff, but just so you know, and when you want to study this more deeply, and hopefully, one or two of you will become the guru on gun violence prevention for your committee. You can break all this stuff down. You can look at the stages of these violent events. You can find intervention points. And, I developed a lovely, eloquent theory that's, too complicated for an elevator speech, but it gives us a lot, and especially in thinking about what third parties can do, what they do. They already do things in these situations often to make them worse, but they can be mobilized to make them better. And third parties could be bar owners, third parties could be bartenders, third parties can be, the trash collector. There's all different ways that people can intervene. So I'm gonna skip forward. But one of the things, and this is a critical thing, so we have these incidents, they happen, there's a response. Primarily the police are the ones that we as a society have decided, have this major responsibility. But there's a whole series of aftermaths that happen after a violent shooting, whether there's a death or not. And we need to pay attention to that time and that space, because that's where the intervention is critical for preventing the next situation. Because you can take in our city, and I'm sure if I had access to all your data, Chief Bash, that we could link the homicides going back across these generations and be able to, in some ways, predict what's likely to happen in the future if there's no intervention and if our resources don't line up. But that aftermath phase is so important, because when these young people, and the 20-something young people too, are left to their own devices, it keeps on spiraling into the next situation. So this is like the whole model, all these things that matter that help you get to having an event. Then there's an intervention point, and injury that wasn't fatal is a very important intervention point. And much like addiction to drugs and alcohol and other things, the lifestyle, the rush that comes from being involved in gun violence, those different things, there needs to be a process of almost detox from that, and detox from the stuff that allows the cycle to keep on going. And that can only happen when we have other resources besides the police, because when kids go back into the system, they're not getting those resources. The trauma, I had originally planned to do my sabbatical in the trauma unit at Grant Hospital. I discovered in the beginning of the year that I couldn't do it mentally, psychologically. I couldn't take that post because it was going to be too hard for me with my own PTSD issues. But that intervention point and working with health providers and other folks in trauma to wrap around that family and the friends of these young people proactively, not treating them like we think you're criminals, you're going to be doing something, but we adults have responsibility to protect you from what might happen, protect you from any potential risk you have to yourself or to someone else. So that is the point of intervention after an injury. Of course, it would be great if we could prevent the the interaction in the first place, and if you have someone intervening, you may be able to. So, wait, let me go back to this really quick. So all of the things that have been discovered from this study and a synthesis of thousands of studies that I have rolling around in my head boil down to a few very practical things of ways that we need to be both mindful and deliberate about tailoring interventions. Exposure to violence, trauma, a fear of the environment, an ecology of danger, and the lack of trust directly influence individual and group thinking that violence is normal and that it's normalized, it's accepted, it's expected. I think more than it being accepted, it's expected. And the same way academic failure is normalized, it's not acceptable, but it's expected often. So that, you know, the negative outcomes that young people are at risk for are actually very commingled. And we can probably, you know, address many issues thinking about this more globally. So the social status and identity, those social norms are supportive of violence. And again, if you think about if you're working with a group of teens and all of the kids that they associate with are involved in some kind of trouble and issues and, you know, don't have a constellation of baggage that they carry around, that's an isolation in and of itself. Other norms aren't coming in. So whatever they're thinking, whatever they're cooking up, it's negative feeding negative. And so you can infuse those networks, but in some ways you have to break them up in different ways so that kids have a chance to see there are opportunities around, but you have to sometimes leave your comfort zone. You have to, you know, disassociate yourself from, you know, if you were taking the substance abuse analogy, from your using friends to be able to get healthy, to get recovery. So a recovery process needs to happen around violence and identity. Violence is context specific, and understanding where it happens, how it unfolds, you know, how things spiral out of control. We can do that by knowing more about what young people are experiencing and hearing from them. Getting people more actively engaged in their community is a huge thing because it impacts social norms and impacts what young people believe about what people believe about their community. So, you know, for example, in our area, we built this really fabulous community garden this year that is 3 times as big as the one we had last year, and it's very bright and cheery. And, you know, I heard many adults and kids say, well, you can't build something like that here. They're just going to destroy it. They're going to steal your plants. They're going to, you know, all of these negative things. And we have 2 really beautiful flowers that were pretty expensive that are in the garden that anybody could walk off with if they want to. They've been there for 3.5 weeks. Nobody has touched them. And we keep adding more beautiful stuff to the garden. Nobody is touching it. And this is impacting the way the children are thinking about the neighborhood. And they're happy, they're proud, they're excited, and it's their garden. You know, there's simple things that we can do that will uplift the community and bring people together to have some conversations to, you know, maybe, you know, we need some kind of collective, like, let's get rid of all the negative stuff that people have said about this neighborhood and only focus on the positive for a while and, you know, see what happens. And I personally think kids can do that for themselves, and then their job in some ways could be to be saying to adults, stop putting my neighborhood down. It's this. My neighborhood's this. You know, have some kind of contest about how great my neighborhood is. Yeah.
You say violence is context specific. Does that take into account the violence psychologically, the images that a lot of these young men see day to day, whether it's the music they listen to or not seeing images that are positive of themselves, whether it's on television, movies, magazines, at the grocery store? I mean, is that considered violence in your research?
I hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah, I mean, it definitely would fit. I'm thinking more about the actual interactions and understanding that the time and the place and the people that make the context.
Right, but there's a context even
Yeah.
for that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah,
And so a
definitely.
lot of times when it comes down to gun violence, it's about value,
Yeah.
right? What allows
Well, it
me-
seems like it is. It seems like it is because there's so much short-circuited decision-making, like very quick. And so it's easy to be on the outside and feel like what it means is that these young people don't value life, they don't value each other and that kind of thing. But often, and I didn't show this slide, but about 60% of the time they're hyped up on something, alcohol or drugs, or, you know, they're not clear-minded thinking. So what may seem like in that moment,
So I grew up in Linden.
yeah,
Right? I went to the worst Columbus City schools. I had some of the worst run-ins with Columbus
Police, you know? And the issue of value is something that happens in
Yeah.
utero,
Yeah.
right? So when you're in a society where you're constantly attacked psychologically and you don't have a sense of value for yourself or your community, it makes it easier, alcohol notwithstanding, drugs notwithstanding. I mean, I understand that. But I'm saying collective violence.
right.
You know, and how are you seeing
Yeah,
that?
when you first said it, I didn't get what you were saying, but I understand now.
Now, how would you interpret that from your research?
I think that's like almost, it's the backdrop of that isolation and not feeling on a global scale that it's going to matter in the long run, because most of these guys didn't think they're going to live past 25.
So is there anything there in kind of what you see as solutions that?
Well, I see pumping positive images as a huge important factor, and also not just like billboards and stuff like that, but it's got to be more personal to the kids and acknowledging their experience, letting them say out loud what you just said and what he said, and you know, not letting them, but listening. You know, we don't listen very well. We like put on all kinds of you know, like we know how they feel and stuff like that. I don't think we really know how they feel. And so the listening part needs to be in small groups. Like you're in a relationship with a kid, so therefore they trust you, they're telling you stuff that's going on. But then at the same time, you're modeling the kind of positive that, you know, all these negative images, until the end of time, they're still going to be there. How do we counteract them? How do we replace them with the positive images of all the successful black men in the world, where there are millions of them, and help a kid to connect to that it's not, you know, some rich person or some person who's connected in some kind of way, that it could be me, that, you know, because if it's just out there, then it's not powerful enough. It's like a raindrop when we need a downpour, you know, and that negative imaging, you know, it's not just this generation, it's all those other generations that have had it. So how do we address it? Well, we address it with this generation of making them know that they're loved and cared about, and we have high expectations for them, and we understand that inequality exists and resources need to be addressing inequality. And, you know, I mean, it's all those complex layers, and all of that stuff is what's under the violence issue, the rage and the anger and the quick movement to using your hands or using a weapon to hurt someone. You know, that's the backdrop that makes it so easy.
So we're going to have to wrap up soon.
Yep.
Could we talk a little bit more about some of the other resources and interventions that you see as helping to prevent some community violence?
Yep. So there's a role for everyone, this slide, just in case you don't see yourself on here. We need children, we need teens and young adults, we need adults, we need advocates, educators, service providers. academics, criminal justice system professionals, policymakers. We need everyone. We need them at all levels, state, county, local, block groups. We need people to be engaged. And some of the ways that I've been working for the last 6 years in the community is, and primarily I think about what I've been doing is capacity building. And only recently, actually, I think 2 days ago, I got official approval to do a real study, an ethnographic community participatory research project with my community and on the South Side. Prior to that, I was building relationships and doing outreach and really work to try to develop intervention. And so we have developed a partnership that is at the grassroots level and was born out of a large group, collaborative group that I brought together called the Youth Violence Prevention Advisory Board. But these partners that I'm working with now, Family Missionary Baptist Church with Pastor Lamar as the pastor and major leader in this, Men for the Movement, Brother Cecil Ahad leading that, the Community Safety Institute that I run at OSU, the National Center for Urban Solutions, Academy for Urban Scholars, and the National Association of Blacks in Criminal Justice. So we've been, not everybody was on board in the beginning. I wasn't a partner in the very beginning. This initiative started in 2009 after the murder of a young man who was near and dear to many people in the community. And pretty much we've been going ever since, and every year on our anniversary we do some kind of major thing to look back of where we've been. And this first Sunday will be the 69th march in a row every single month, and people are like, oh, well, why do you march? So we have a march. We go out around the community, and that's probably a symbolic part of what we do, but then we also have a workshop or a service after the march where people come back into the church and we talk about issues that are on people's minds directly, what's been happening on the ground. And again, that's just one component of what we do. I'm going to go back to a couple of other slides. Now I got myself screwed up, but let me try to recover real quick. No, I'll just talk. So we have primarily been doing this as volunteers. We've had a couple of very small funding opportunities that came primarily funding to do public education, to create a marketing campaign about Stop the Violence. And so I know many of our materials are still in city buildings and still around Columbus, although the stuff is fading, the older stuff that was the Don't Shoot. So, you know, back in 2010, I worked really hard to try to get the Ceasefire Chicago model here and, you know, build that intervention. And the reason why I thought that that was a good fit for Columbus, and we thought, the Youth Violence Prevention Advisory Board thought that was a good fit, was because of the fact that what we could do was develop these grassroots relationships in the community and have credible messengers who could work directly to intervene in shootings. And the different parts of that model that I liked, some parts I didn't like, and what we have done both since and in the process is have something that includes all of the elements of Cure Violence or Ceasefire. They changed the name. Plus all of the other things that I think are important that have much more to do with adolescent development in healthy communities, doing things to build communities. So the major thrust of the Cure Violence intervention is that you have these outreach workers who are usually someone recruited from the community that maybe had a violent past, has credible relationships, and has influence with gang members or individuals who are at the highest risk for being shot or shooting someone. Those people work those networks. They take, you know, information and the relationships and directly help to intervene. So we have people who do that for us as volunteers. They have worked incredibly hard. We had a period of time where we went 27 months without a murder in our area, which was, I think I have this in here. No, I'm just gonna skip it. All right, sorry. I spent too much time talking about my research. But I think it's probably more important, maybe. So anyway, this holistic approach of what we do has shifted in focus over time from dealing with the fact that the community was in so much pain from having all these homicides to trying to heal from that, to then thinking about how do you change kind of the spirit of the community from this grief place to a place of thinking about possibility and future. And so more and more of the focus over time has been on providing opportunities for young people, for creating opportunities for family. And so we have a summer program and an all year round program that work with children in the community and then also the families in the community. And what that allows us to do is to be working systematically to try to both be a support network of care for the families, provide also just this overall fun experience for the kids during the summer that's safe, and it actually extends all year round. So for example, we have garden club all year round on Wednesday nights after school. Kids come and we planted seeds in the basement of the church and had a light, and all those seeds have now been planted out in the garden, and our tomatoes are about this tall. And kids come, I make them eat fruits and vegetables, and at first it was like, oh, there's no ranch dip. I'm like, no, I want you to be healthy. And they're like, oh, come on, Dr. D, can we have some ranch dip? No, we're gonna be healthy. So we have the garden, we have the march. The kids are engaged, and the engagement, and really, it's all the community people who are doing this. It's their passion and commitment. And whether they're paid or not, they show up, they're doing this, they're caring about these kids and their parents and their families and helping them to get the resources they need. And that's what we need to be doing. There's no big dollar amount that's been thrown at this small community that we're working, but people who are hurting have found some healing. People who, I won't go on for that, but one of the things that I wanted to bring your attention to is an app that I created, and you have on your table a little door hanger flyer. And I would like to encourage you and everyone use your network. And I get stats on how many people download this, so I don't get your personal information, but I just get somebody in Franklin County downloaded this app. On this app includes the community resource guide that we developed in 2012, which I think many of you had. It was this little booklet that could fit in the back of your pocket that was like 125 pages long, all of resources that are in the community. The app also tracks all of our newsletters, our information, and we have an activity at least 3 times a week at the Family Missionary Baptist Church, and we would do things other places. We do things outside of the church as well. Not everyone is part of this church, or we have other things going on in the community, but that's really the home base. And because they've been willing to use their resources to allow us that space. And so again, the public education campaign, we've stopped putting out so much stuff because we don't have as many shootings in the area as we did in the past. And for a while, we had the neighborhood saturated constantly, and now it is more of a maintenance type of mode where it's really staying on top of those networks of highest risk. And that works. That really does work. It doesn't mean that we can prevent every shooting and, the ones that have happened have really set us back in a lot of ways, but also reminded us that we have to be constantly vigilant because this beast is huge and not something like you can get groups to stop beefing with each other, but that doesn't mean someone's not going to come and stick someone up, and then when they don't cooperate in the robbery, murder them. And
Dr. Wilkinson, we're approaching 8 o'clock, so
Yep.
I wanted to, if you just have a couple takeaways that you want to share before we move to just a bit of discussion so that
Okay.
people can move on with their evenings.
all right, you guys don't want to talk about this forever? Come on. All right. So, yeah, I think in terms of takeaways, I hope you take away that there's a lot that we can be doing. And even though this is a complex problem at many layers, at many levels, that the solutions are here in our hands, and particularly for public officials, elected officials, taking leadership in this and showing and taking leadership in a way that shows the young people you care consistently. Because you know what, I've been out there 5.5, almost 6 years, and if I stopped showing up tomorrow, they would believe that, well, they were right all along. I'm not gonna be there long term. They need that consistency, that long-term commitment, and from one administration to another, all those kinds of things, like really a strong commitment to making things work and not giving up on them and not assuming that all of them are involved in violence. I said 5 to 8% of the young people. So even the 5 to 8%, there's probably only 2% that are the really hard to reach. The other ones are not that hard to reach. We're just not reaching for them. So that's my
Thank you. I know
takeaway.
that you have a lot more to share over your years in this field. We appreciate the work that you're doing here in the community. So thank you for With that, I know that you all know that the City of Columbus does provide some resources to organizations who try to support the development of all of our youth and adults in the community. But every once in a while, it's great to take a pause and see, how well we're doing. A lot of the things that Dr. Wilkinson shared today certainly, piqued our interest in terms of how can we do a better job of partnering directly with our community at the grassroots level who know these young people who we're trying to touch. And so many of you around the table do that every day. And we need to figure out a way that we can better communicate so that our policies reflect more of the work that you're doing and what works on the ground. With that, I'll turn it over to Councilmember Harden to see if he has anything to
Well,
add.
I would just, one of the things that I heard and what I've taken away, and I've had an opportunity to kind of watch from afar at some point, I started in the mayor's office right around this 2010 time when you were doing a lot of this work. And what I'm taking away today is that we all have a role in this. We all have responsibility. I think one of the barriers that we continue to run into in this in this area is I think we sometimes work in our own silos. And so there is good work being done out there in the community and throughout the neighborhoods. And folks are doing it, but we're working within silos. So to the best of our abilities that we are able to leverage one another, leverage what is going on already, build upon and really work together behind evidence-based work, then I think that's a direction that I would, that I look to, and really acknowledging the work that everybody is doing out here, that it is all impactful and it is it has meaning, but just how do we bring those efforts together? I wanted, last time when we met, I didn't open it up a little bit too. I want to open it up to the task force to see if there's any last minute remarks, but I also want to, there are a few folks from the community who came, if they had a few comments, I wanted to give that opportunity as well. So first I'll give it to the task force. If anybody had thoughts, ideas, kind of wrapping up your takeaways from this presentation, and then I'll turn it over to see if anybody in the audience would like to add.
I'll just make one comment, and I think it's very important for us to continue to inform the community where resources and having a one-stop shop that can function as a clearinghouse or a repository for families. We know that crises will occur, but we will maybe internally we can think about ways how we can be more responsive, more agile in responding, school and community. Because I know I work a lot with Columbus City School educators, and sometimes they're in desperate need of resources just to work with the child within the school, not necessarily outside of the school. And when you talk about those multiple layers of stakeholders, I think we need to find ways to help those stakeholders within those contexts, because that was one thing that was quite evident. There's a context when these violence tend to happen, but it's also a context when you can interact and intervene and support students. And so we got to make sure that we have those kind of resources that city government, the schools, and the community work as a unit rather than a silo.
As far as a listing of resources, I just want everyone to know that we do have Hands On Central Ohio, which isn't specifically, it might not provide all of the services that Dr. Moore mentioned, but it does at least list a lot of the resources that are available, just for folks to try to reach out and connect to. They're not going to make the connection and they don't check to see if there's a capacity to serve folks, but it at least provides a listing of organizations by zip code that could potentially meet a need. And that's available by phone and also by online.
One of the takeaways would be in the context of our conversation today is that here in Columbus we have a natural connection that exists in every high school where there is a school resource officer in the schools. And at West High School we went through the process of having some small conversations between our young men of color and our SRO, asking them the question, what is your relationship like with the police officers in your community? And that was, for many of them, the first time that they had a chance to answer that question. And I think that that's a good leverage point for us, because it's an existing cross-section of the work that's being done in our police department and the access to youth on a daily basis.
Thank you. First of all, my name is Stanley Fournier outside. I was the former outreach specialist with Dr. Deanna Wilkinson on Columbus Ceasefire. Worked 3 years at Ohio State. Traveled all over with Dr. Wilkinson to Chicago and many other neighborhoods and some of the most violent neighborhoods. Trying to understand how we address this problem in Columbus. Because of whatever, and we can talk about that till I'm blue in the face, and it'll take a lot of talking to turn me blue. What I know for sure, born and raised in the city, 54 years I've been right here, is we know enough. We live in a city that is academic research rich. I've served on every task force, being disproportionate minority contact, founding member of the Regional Task Force, worked with Homeland Security. I've done it all. Ex-offender. Mother served 3 years in prison. I served 3, and my son went served 3 while I was serving 3. So, what I know for sure is we know enough. And I'm happy to see, this first time I've come to some of these, I've been getting invitations. I'm happy to see it's not a lot of the same usual people that get on these task force. And so what I would ask this task force, and I'm praying, and my heart is heavy, and I'm trying not to get emotional every meeting I recently dealing with what all we're dealing with as a community, and I'm talking right now about the Linden community that needs y'all. We got quadruple homicide in Hudson, Mike Laurel's family. And so I shared with my councilman earlier, as we're sitting here thinking about what we might do to be my brother's keeper, we got brothers out there in cap right now. And so we can have another think tank. I trust my brother here that this is about something to move something forward in this situation. Let's stop. Stop. 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, I need to be home with my grandbabies, with my family. We buried your daughter on Friday at Apostolic Church in Bridgeville. If anybody's concerned about that. We know that. We know how to fix this. There's some things that are working. There's some things we can be doing better. But from a person that went to prison 3 years in this broken justice system, who have done everything since I came home to try to save young black men on the streets out here. I met with Professor Moore, you and I had dinner one time way back in the day. I'm glad to see you. But I met with some athletes that came out of this Rocky Hudson. Andy Quinn and those guys came to the funeral of Michael Moore. No, he wasn't just know anybody. Yeah, he got lost in the streets. But that young man moved into my mother's house and carried my mother up down the steps as she was dying and helped us carry her. His daughter's throat was cut. And so let's talk about human stuff. Let's talk about how we respond as a community don't get. And I've been talking to some pastors, we're trying to put something together. But my brother's keeper initiative, I have to use that incredible environment health as this moves across this country, this initiative. But if we're going to do the same thing we've always done, and make all these laws that we take these laws and voters, my office is full of them on every subject. And we're not going to move this stuff to action. I don't know what else to tell these young people. When I spend all day Saturday, I'll spend all day Friday trying to put their life based on what I learned about this. You know that. And so I will go. And I asked a lot of people, I posted this all over Facebook, and I got the same response. None of me, nobody's listening. I heard somebody talk about resource officers in school, and I just want to say, let's connect all the pieces of the puzzle. The CDC said years ago, disproportionate minority contact committee, Dr. Moore, that the school to prison pipeline was created because of resource officers in schools. I heard somebody tell me on the phone today, CPD and helping the community understand how to talk to police or how to deal with the police. But when we know how to help the police understand how we feel, and why we got to keep on understanding how to be in relationship with them and we're not getting that back in return. And that didn't, no offense to the police, because I work with Deputy Chief Jeff Blackwell before he went to Cincinnati. He was my co-chair. I chaired the Youth Violence Advisory Board, re-elected twice. We've been doing this kind of group thing for a long time. And nobody out on the streets knows me and you doing this group thing. So I'm not going to hog up the floor, but for all of you guys, it sounds like, I'm glad to see that it's not the same people. But as we're getting ready to keep my brother's out there right now in Hudson, and I called everybody I knew in a position of power to help them understand that after we buried Michael Laurel Saturday, there was going to be some shootings, because I heard it all in the streets. And so until we go get that murderer, we must embrace this community. Not just this community, but there's so many other situations like this that Dr. Lewis has shared that we have to do better. This has to be about action, not another report. One was given out today. I get a copy, I'm going to read it. But how many more can I read?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I got a very brief voice, so I'm not going to stand up. I got an email today, that's why I'm here. I spent my night thinking about how I can change this city. This is a beautiful city. Been downtown, it's gorgeous. It's clean. People pick up downtown. When you walk outside of downtown, it reminds me of the movie New York, Escape from New York. When you leave that Central Core, there's a lot going on that's not being addressed. I talk to youth all the time. They don't want to talk anymore. They want jobs. And every youth that I've noticed in trouble, that's gotten a job, is still on the right path. When I go into the dollar store on Main Street, the young lady greets me, and she says, Mr. Thomas, I am just so happy I got a job. There's programs in this city that's putting people to work. ASU over on Broad Street, John Gregory, he's graduating every student that comes in there with a diploma, not a GED, not some sub program. He's actually graduating students, and those students are crossing the city and getting jobs. We got Men for the Movement, Ministry for the Movement, Pastor Frederick Lamar over there on Oakwood. That program's been running for 68 months this coming month. Every first Sunday at 3 o'clock, people know that that program's going to happen. It's called consistency. And what I hear from the youth is we got all these programs in Columbus, but they're not getting the benefit. And, you know, to create a task force to say that we want to address the problem, we have a lot of programs that's getting funding that's not going to the youth. They're not seeing it. They're not getting jobs. They're hanging out on the street corner. You know, the other night I picked up a baby, six years old. Where are you going? It's 11 o'clock at night. I'm trying to get across town to my aunt's house because my parents are fighting, and that's the only place I feel safe. So I put him on the bus, followed the bus, watched him get off, and that's where he went. Went to his aunt's house so he could have some peace. You know, we got the shooting on Hudson. This Sunday we had 3 people die. And I'm all over the place because I want you to hear my message. We got traumatized neighborhoods with no follow-up, no treatment. I'm 4 years old and I watched someone gun down a person in my family or murder a person in my family. I'm getting no treatment. I go to bed at night, I have nightmares. I get up in the day, I have fear. I have pain in my heart and nobody's asking me how I feel. We don't need a task force for that. We need action. We need people to go in our community and say, how can I help you? And then follow up. I actually was going to pay some youth to come with me, but it's the wrong time of day to find them. I would have paid them out of my pocket to come here and tell you what they tell me. Okay? I'm on the streets. Your officers see me at night. I fear for my life. I told counsel repeatedly, I fear for being a black man. 4 weeks ago, I got pulled over at the corner of 161 and Cleveland. The officer said I didn't use my turn signal. But he didn't show up for court on Monday because I used my turn signal. He really thought I was driving a stolen vehicle because it came up red instead of blue. And we had an exchange, a civil exchange, which he told me he was giving me a ticket because of my attitude. Well, I got an attitude. I'm not ashamed of it. And you can hear it when I talk. I have an attitude. I spent last Monday down on campus listening to college students say exactly what the youth are saying. No one's listening to them. No one cares about them. All the programs in the city, and they're not seeing the resources. My brother's keeper, I went to one of the first meetings over at King Art Center. And I sit in the law discussion section. And I heard a lot of good things. And I've been waiting to see a reaction. Our youth are not, they're broken. And they can be fixed. They don't need to go to jail. They don't need to be arrested. They don't need to be militarized at school. They need our help. I see a lot of men on this panel. Of the ones I see on the panel, I know 4 of you personally have been out in the neighborhood where I'm at. Okay? When I'm out there at night, and I'm talking to the youth, they take care of me because they know I'll take care of them. And I'm going to tell you one more thing, then I'm going to stop. On January 1st, or December 31st, at the corner of Linwood, 1137. A youth was sent to take me out. And when he reached into his pocket and he recognized me, all he could say was, "Oh, Mr. Thomas, I'm sorry." And he ran away. Prior to that happening, I made 4 calls to the police department to respond to the gun violence in that neighborhood that night. To respond to that location because there was gun violence at that location. The dispatcher told me repeatedly that officers was on the way. So I stayed. I almost lost my life in the process. My safe haven would have been the church, but the church was full of youth for the midnight service, the New Year Eve service. And when I got to the church and I was being followed, I decided not to go inside the church. I decided to get the heck out of Columbus and go home. I had to feel it that I wasn't going to make it that night. The next day I had to make a decision whether I go back or not. I do it for the youth, I go back. If that young man would have taken my life, I wouldn't be here today to tell you the story. I've told the story to certain people, but not a lot. Because that young man got a job and he's working. He's taking care of his 2 kids and his girlfriend. He's living in that neighborhood. And guess what? If I make a phone call to him right now, he's got my back. And I got his. So it's not a personal story about me. It's a personal story about the youth in our community. We don't need a task force to respond to what I just said. Since we have a task force, I'm empowering you to go into the community, on your feet, knock on the doors, and listen. I have an adopted community. From Linwood, from Lockbourne to 22nd to Ohio to Whittier. I've spent the last 6 years in that community. If I knock on the door, people know who I am. I don't live in that community. I'm never going to live in that community. I guarantee you not a week goes by and I don't spend 4 or 5 hours down there. I sit on a panel for restorative justice that meets every first and third Tuesday at a church there in that community. Where we hear youth that have a problem, we give them a plan, and they come back, and we erase their record. That program is through Judge Gill. That program is struggling to spread across the city. That program takes that community out of the jailhouse, out of the record book, back into family life, and it gives them opportunity. I go into South High School and I hear young people tell me,
All right, Mr. Thomas.
If someone will listen, they'll talk.
I
went into West High School and 300 youth sat down in a circle with me and told me stories that they'll never tell anybody else. And remember, it's not about me, it's about what I'm trying to do. And I thank you for listening to me. I hope and I pray I see you in the community.
I appreciate your comments, and I appreciate hearing from everyone, and I appreciate everyone's time, and that's what I'm trying to be respectful of. Like I said when I first started this off, if this ends with just another report, then we will have failed, and that's why I think you have folks that are around this table, folks that are around this community, folks that are out in the neighborhoods like yourself that are committed to action, and so I appreciate you being here. I appreciate everybody around this table for being here, and good evening. Thank you.